Did you ever imagine that a touch of old, dry bones could bring a man back to life? What if I told you, somewhere in the ancient world, faith was strong enough to stop an army or fill empty jars with endless oil? And can you picture a regular farmer working under the hot sun, suddenly called to become a legend, a man whose legacy would outlive even his own death? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the real story of Elisha, a story about miracles, about hope in the darkest moments, about how one person's faith can change everything for a family, for a nation, and maybe for you. Today, let's step back in time. Let's walk the dusty roads of Israel. Let's witness what happens when ordinary people answer an extraordinary call. Are you ready to discover a journey where the impossible becomes possible? Let's dive in. Imagine closing your eyes and stepping back almost 3,000 years. You find yourself in ancient Israel. It's a harsh land. The hills are dry. The rivers are precious. Every drop of water means the world to a farmer. People live close to the earth, planting, hoping, praying for rain. But the real storms, they come from the heart, because this was a time of conflict and uncertainty. The Israelites, God's chosen people, found themselves surrounded by powerful enemies. Empires rose and fell in every direction: Assyria, Egypt, Babylon. Every border was a question mark, and inside their own land, people were divided. Some still clung to the faith of their ancestors, the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Others were drawn away by the gods and customs of nearby nations. Pagan altars stood on hilltops. Temples to Baal and Asherais cast long shadows over the countryside. Faith was fragile. Doubt was everywhere. And fear was real. Imagine hearing rumors of war from the north, hunger in the fields, a drought that drags on year after year. Neighbors start to whisper, "Where is God? Has he forgotten us?" You can almost feel the tension in the air. In these moments, miracles aren't just stories, they are lifelines. For the people of ancient Israel, a miracle was more than a break from reality. It was a sign, a breath of hope, proof that God still cared, proof that in a world of chaos, there was still order, purpose, and meaning. Now think for a second about how powerful that idea is. When you feel lost, when everything seems stacked against you, wouldn't you long for a sign? Wouldn't you want to believe that, just maybe, something bigger is looking out for you? That longing, the hope for a miracle, isn't just ancient history, it's part of who we are. It lives in every culture, every age. Let's pause and look around the ancient world. The Greeks had stories of mighty gods, Zeus hurling thunderbolts, Athena giving wisdom to heroes. They believed in omens, signs in the sky, or a voice from a sacred spring. The Egyptians, they built pyramids that scraped the heavens. They believed in magic, in gods who could flood the Nile or raise the dead. People in every corner of the earth looked for the extraordinary to break into their ordinary lives. But Israel's miracles, they were different. They didn't come from magicians. They didn't depend on the whims of many gods. They came from one God, a God who was personal, a God who knew every name, every heartbreak, a God who could turn a handful of oil into a feast or call down fire from the sky, a God who met people where they were, in their struggles, their hunger, their fear. Why do miracles matter so much in the story of Elisha? Because, for Israel, a miracle wasn't just a spectacle, it was a message. It said, "You are not alone, you are seen, you are loved, and you are called to something greater." That message carried people through the darkest nights. It brought comfort to mothers watching their children waste away from famine. It brought courage to soldiers standing on the walls of a city under siege. It sparked hope in the heart of every person who dared to believe that the world could be different. Miracles didn't always look like lightning and thunder. Sometimes they were small, a jug of oil that never ran dry, a pot of stew that never spoiled, a gentle word at just the right moment. Even today, maybe you've seen something you couldn't explain, a coincidence too perfect, a kindness at the exact moment you needed it, a door opening when you thought all hope was gone. We still long for those moments. We still crave meaning when the world feels uncertain. That's why Elisha's story matters, now as much as ever, because it's about more than just magic tricks in the past. It's about the power of hope, faith, and perseverance. It's about the human longing for connection, for assurance, for a sign that we're not alone in our struggles. And maybe, just maybe, it's about believing that miracles are still possible if we open our eyes and our hearts. So as we begin this journey with Elisha, ask yourself, what are you hoping for? Where in your life do you long for a sign? Maybe his story will help you see the extraordinary, even in the ordinary. And speaking of extraordinary, what happens when an ordinary man says yes to an extraordinary calling? Let's step into Elisha's shoes. Let's see how his life was changed forever by one simple act of faith. Let's continue. Let's slow things down for a moment. Before the miracles, before the legends, Elisha was just ordinary. Picture this. It's early morning in ancient Israel. The sun is just beginning to warm the fields. You hear the soft sounds of oxen, their hooves pressing into the dirt. A young man stands behind the plow, hands rough from years of work, guiding the animals along straight lines. That young man is Elisha. For most of his life, he knew the meaning of hard labor. He woke up before dawn, he worked until dusk. He sweated and dreamed and worried, just like anyone trying to make a living from the earth. Elisha was a farmer's son. He wasn't born into royalty. He wasn't a priest or a warrior or a famous teacher, just a regular guy with calluses on his hands and dirt under his nails. But if you looked closely, you'd see something more, a quiet determination, a spark of hope. Maybe he wondered about the world beyond his fields. Maybe, like so many of us, he sometimes looked up at the sky and asked, "Is this all there is?" One day, everything changed. The great prophet Elijah, a legend even in his own time, walked straight out to the field. He didn't come with fanfare or a parade. He just placed his own cloak over Elisha's shoulders. In that culture, in that moment, this was a sign of something huge. It meant, you are chosen. Your life is about to change. Now, here's the thing that amazes me. Elisha didn't hesitate. He didn't say, "Let me think about it." He didn't negotiate. He left his plow behind, but he didn't just walk away. He did something bold, something radical. He took his oxen, slaughtered them, and cooked the meat over a fire made from his plowing equipment. He served the food to his family, his neighbors, everyone who had known him as just Elisha the farmer. It was a feast, but more than that, it was a farewell. Burning his plow wasn't just about quitting his job. It was about closing the door on his old life, destroying any chance of going back. No backup plan. No, just in case. It was all in. He was saying, there's no turning back. I'm choosing a new destiny. Let's pause here. Can you imagine what it takes to make a decision like that? Think about it. How many of us, when faced with a big choice, want to keep a safety net? We tell ourselves we'll try something new, but only if it doesn't cost us too much. We hold on to our old job, our old habits, just in case. But Elisha teaches us something different. He shows us what it looks like to burn your bridges, to bet everything on a calling you can't even fully see yet. This burning the plow moment. It isn't just a story from the past. It's a timeless lesson. Let me share a real-life example. A few years ago, I met a woman named Jennifer. She was a successful marketing executive, good pay, a comfortable life, but she kept feeling a tug in her heart, a sense that she was meant for something more. After months of soul-searching, Jennifer left her job. She sold her fancy car, moved into a smaller apartment, and launched a nonprofit to support single mothers. People thought she was crazy. Some said she'd be back in the corporate world within a year, but she never looked back. Like Elisha, she burned her plow. There was no plan B. And you know what? She's built a community that's changed hundreds of lives. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. We all have moments when we sense that call, a nudge to try something bold, to let go of what's comfortable and step into the unknown. But here's the common mistake. Most people hesitate. They stay in the same routine. They say, maybe next year. They tell themselves, I'll go after my dream, but only if I can keep my old life too. That's not how change works. Transformation asks for courage. It asks for a leap, not a shuffle. It asks us to leave the past behind, even when it's scary. And that's what makes Elisha's story so powerful. He chose to act fully, decisively. He accepted that a new destiny meant closing the door on the old one. So here's a small lesson to carry with you. When you sense a calling, when life puts a cloak on your shoulders, don't be afraid to say yes. Don't let fear or comfort hold you back. Maybe your plow is a job you've outgrown. Maybe it's a relationship or a role you've played for too long. Burning the plow is a symbol. It's about embracing change. It's about trusting that something greater is ahead, even when you can't see the whole road. Now, as Elisha walked away from the smoke and the ashes of his old life, he stepped into the unknown. He had no idea what was waiting for him. No list of miracles, no promises of glory, just faith, just the hope that he was meant for more. So what happens when someone takes that first bold step? How does ordinary become extraordinary? Let's follow Elisha as he learns from one of history's greatest prophets. Let's see what happens when courage meets mentorship and destiny begins to unfold. Let's keep going. What does it take to turn an ordinary life into an extraordinary journey? Sometimes all it takes is the right mentor. Let's talk about Elijah. For Elisha, Elijah wasn't just a teacher, he was a force of nature. He was the man people whispered about in crowded marketplaces, the prophet who dared to stand up to kings and call down fire from heaven. The stories about Elijah were legendary. But imagine being the one chosen to walk alongside him. Elisha became that student. From the moment Elijah placed his cloak on Elisha's shoulders, a new chapter began. A chapter of learning, stretching, and growing. Think about it. Elijah was bold. He didn't just talk about faith, he lived it. He challenged idols, faced down threats, and put his trust in a God most people could only talk about. For Elisha, every day with Elijah was a masterclass in courage and conviction. One moment stands above the rest. It happened on Mount Carmel. This wasn't just any mountain, it was the place where Elijah faced off against 450 prophets of Baal, a contest of gods, with the fate of the nation hanging in the balance. Elijah stood alone on one side. He called for an altar to be built. He poured water over the sacrifice, making sure no trickery was possible. He prayed a simple prayer, and then fire fell from heaven. It wasn't just a spark, it was a blazing miracle. Everything burned, the sacrifice, the stones, even the water in the trench. Everyone saw it. Everyone was stunned. Elisha was there, witnessing it all. Imagine what that did to him. Watching his mentor, calm and sure, put everything on the line. No backup plan, just faith. And God answered. It was more than a miracle, it was a lesson. Elisha learned that real power isn't about showmanship or bravado. It's about trust, boldness, and letting your life point to something bigger than yourself. You know, in today's world, we sometimes overlook how powerful mentorship can be. But if you talk to athletes, business leaders, or artists, you'll hear the same story. Behind every great performer, there's usually a mentor who believed in them, even before they believed in themselves. Take Michael Jordan, for example. He had coaches who pushed him, teammates who challenged him, and mentors who saw his potential before the world ever did. Or think about Oprah Winfrey. She often speaks about the teachers and mentors who changed her life, who taught her to dream bigger and stand stronger. It's the same dynamic we see in Elisha and Elijah. Let's pause for a second and think about this. What does it really look like when a leader steps aside and a new chapter begins? In every culture, there's a moment of passing the torch, a rite of passage. But few are as dramatic, as meaningful, or as breathtaking as the story of Elijah and Elisha. Imagine the two of them walking together for the last time. The sun is setting over the land of Israel. Every step they take is weighted with history. They pass through ancient towns, places where miracles happened, memories clinging to the air. Elijah knows his journey is almost over. Elisha knows his is just beginning. When they reach the banks of the Jordan River, something incredible happens. Elijah takes his cloak, the very same cloak that marked Elisha's calling. He rolls it up. He strikes the water, and right before Elisha's eyes, the river splits in two. Dry ground appears, just like in the days of Moses. They walk across, side by side, into a new beginning. But Elijah has one last question for his student. He turns and asks, "What do you want from me before I'm taken away?" It's the moment of truth. Elisha could ask for comfort. He could ask for safety. But instead, he asks for something bold. He says, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." What does that mean? It's not just about having twice the power. It's about carrying the mission forward, shouldering the burden of leadership, not just copying the past, but building something greater. Elisha is saying, I want to honor what you've started, but I also want to make it my own. I want to lead with vision, not just memory. It takes guts to ask for more than what came before, to stand in the shadow of a giant and believe you can be more than just a reflection. And then, the moment arrives. Suddenly, chariots of fire and horses blaze across the sky. A whirlwind rises, fierce and wild. Elijah is taken up into heaven in a rush of wind and flame. And just like that, Elisha is left standing alone, the cloak of his mentor falling to the ground. He picks it up. He wraps it around his shoulders. And in that instant, the weight of responsibility, the fear, the hope, all settle on him. It's his turn. He walks back to the river. He faces the swirling water. He takes the cloak and he strikes the river, just as Elijah did. The waters part again. Elisha crosses back, not as a student, but as a leader. This is a powerful image. The mantle, the symbol of calling and authority, passes from one generation to the next. But the river, that's the challenge, the test. Every leader faces their own Jordan, their own impossible crossing. The real question is, will you dare to step forward, take the risk, and lead in your own way? I see this moment echoed everywhere. Think of every president stepping into office, every CEO inheriting a company, every coach who takes over a winning team. They don't just keep the seat warm. The greatest leaders honor the past, but have the courage to move forward. They ask for the double portion, not to outshine those before them, but to bring new vision, new strength, new hope. Sometimes that means breaking new ground. Sometimes it means facing criticism or doubts. But the mantle is never given to someone who's content to just imitate. It's given to those who are ready to grow, to adapt, to serve something greater than themselves. Here's the lesson I see in Elisha's story. True leadership isn't about copying what's already been done. It's about building on that foundation, being bold enough to ask for more, and humble enough to accept the responsibility. And when your time comes, don't just hold the mantle, live it. Step into your role with faith, with heart, and with a vision for what can be, because you never know. Your own chariot of fire moment might be just around the corner. So as Elisha steps into his new destiny, carrying the mantle and a double portion of spirit, he's not just following in Elijah's footsteps. He's creating his own path. He's ready to face the world, not as a shadow of his mentor, but as a leader in his own right. Now, with the mantle on his shoulders, Elisha's journey truly begins. But what does leadership look like when miracles are needed? Not just for yourself, but for a whole nation. Let's watch as Elisha's first challenges reveal what it really means to lead with faith, courage, and compassion. Let's talk about miracles, but not just the earth-shaking fire from heaven kind. Let's talk about miracles that touch everyday lives, because that's what Elisha became known for, miracles of healing and provision that met people where they were, in their deepest need. Picture the ancient city of Jericho, a place with history, with scars, and with hope. But Jericho had a problem. Its water was bad, so bad nothing would grow, and people were getting sick. No crops, no future. The whole community was struggling, staring at a well that held only disappointment. And then Elisha arrived. He listened, he cared, he asked for a new bowl and some salt, a simple thing. He walked to the spring, tossed in the salt, and spoke a word of healing. This is what the Lord says, I have healed this water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. And the water was healed, not just for a day, but for generations. What's the lesson here? Elisha didn't just perform a miracle for show. He restored hope. He answered a basic human need. He brought life back to a dying city. Next, let's look at another miracle, one that started in a kitchen. A widow was desperate. Her husband had died, leaving her with nothing but debt and 2 sons who were about to be taken as slaves. All she had left was a tiny jar of oil. That's it. She reached out to Elisha, not expecting much, just a bit of mercy, but Elisha told her to do something strange. He said, borrow as many empty jars as you can from your neighbors. Don't ask for just a few. Then pour your oil into all those jars. She obeyed, even though it sounded impossible. And as she poured, the oil kept flowing. Jar after jar filled up. The miracle didn't stop until every vessel was full. She sold the oil, paid her debts, and saved her sons. Once again, the miracle wasn't about spectacle. It was about meeting real, practical needs. about giving a family a second chance. Let's look at one more story: 100 hungry men and only a handful of loaves. It wasn't enough, not by human standards, but Elisha blessed the food and told his servant, "Give it to the people." The servant hesitated. "How can I set this before 100 men?" But Elisha insisted. The bread was passed out, and everyone ate. There were leftovers. Sound familiar? It's a story that echoes through history, even showing up later in the miracles of Jesus. What do all these stories have in common? They aren't about fame or power. They're about compassion, about meeting people where they are, hungry, tired, desperate, and giving them what they need. Let's bring this closer to home. Think about clean water. Right now, organizations like Charity Water or Water.org work every day to bring safe, drinkable water to families around the world, including right here in the U.S., in places where wells have run dry or pipes have failed. Think about food banks, how one can of soup, one bag of groceries can mean everything to a family that's struggling after a hurricane or a layoff. Think about the volunteers who show up after natural disasters, floods, fires, tornadoes. They hand out blankets, clean water, sandwiches. It might seem small, but to the person in need, it's a miracle. Here's the mistake we make, time and time again. We wait for the big, flashy moments. We overlook the little miracles, everyday kindness, a helping hand, a word of encouragement, a meal shared. But those small acts, they add up. They save lives. They restore hope. Just like Elisha's miracles, they show us that the heart of faith is compassion, taking action when someone needs you most. So here's the real lesson. You don't have to part a river or call down fire from the sky to make a difference. You just have to show up. You have to care. Maybe it's helping a neighbor carry groceries. Maybe it's checking in on a friend who's going through a tough time. Maybe it's volunteering a Saturday at your local food pantry or making a donation to a water project across the world. Every time you meet a real need, no matter how small, you're part of a miracle, and you never know when that little act of kindness will ripple out, changing a life, healing a heart, or inspiring someone else to do the same. Elisha didn't just perform miracles for kings and crowds. He healed water for a village. He multiplied oil for a widow. He fed the hungry with simple bread. He showed us what it means to use what you have, right where you are. Now, as Elisha's story continues, the miracles grow even bolder and the stakes get higher, because sometimes it's not just about providing for the body. Sometimes it's about restoring faith itself. Let's see what happens when hope is nearly lost and a miracle brings life out of the darkest moment. Let's pause and talk about faith. Real faith. Not the kind you read about in books, but the kind that's tested when everything seems lost. There's a moment in Elisha's story that's easy to miss, but it holds a depth that touches every human heart. Picture a small village. A woman in Shunem had opened her home to Elisha, giving him food and a quiet room to rest during his journeys. She didn't ask for anything in return, but Elisha saw her kindness. He asked, "What do you need?" She answered honestly. She had no children and her husband was old. Elisha promised, "You will have a son." And she did. But happiness, as it sometimes does, didn't last. When the boy was still young, tragedy struck. He collapsed in the fields and died in his mother's arms. It's the kind of heartbreak that stops the world. But this mother, she refused to let despair win. She saddled a donkey and rode straight to Elisha, miles away. Her journey was powered by grief and one last spark of hope. She told Elisha, "Did I ask you for a son? Didn't I say, don't get my hopes up?" She demanded an answer, not from anger, but from the depth of a mother's love. Elisha followed her home. He climbed the stairs to the small upper room where the child lay. He prayed. He stretched himself out on the boy, face to face, heart to heart, and then life returned. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Imagine the tears, the joy, the disbelief turning to awe. This was more than a miracle. This was the power of faith. Faith that refuses to give up, even when hope seems gone. It's the kind of faith that can move mountains, or in this case, bring life out of loss. But faith isn't always celebrated. Sometimes it's mocked. Not long after, Elisha walked toward Bethel. A crowd of young men from the town began to jeer. They mocked his appearance, calling him bald head. But it went deeper than that. Their laughter was a rejection of who Elisha was and of the authority he carried. It wasn't just teasing. It was contempt for something sacred. Elisha turned, and in that moment, called down a curse in God's name. 2 bears came out of the woods, and many of the mockers were hurt. It's a tough story to swallow. Why such a harsh consequence? Here's how I see it. The miracle of the Shunammite's son is about hope, perseverance, and the reward of faith. The mocker's story is about boundaries, about the importance of respect, even in a world that loves to question, to challenge, to poke fun at what others hold dear. In today's world, we celebrate skepticism. We value questions, curiosity, even a little irreverence. That's healthy, up to a point. But there's a line. Real faith, real leadership still deserves respect. Not blind obedience, but an understanding that some things and some people carry a weight that shouldn't be dismissed lightly. Let's make this real. Think about a classroom. A good teacher encourages questions, but when students cross the line, when questions become mockery, when learning turns to ridicule, everyone loses. The environment breaks down. Or picture a community leader, maybe a coach, a pastor, a mentor. Respect doesn't mean you agree with every word. But when you honor their role, you create space for growth, learning, and yes, miracles. Here's the lesson that ties both stories together. Faith and respect are deeply connected. You can ask questions. You can even doubt. But don't lose sight of wonder, of reverence for the people, the moments, and the beliefs that shape us. Because sometimes the miracle isn't in getting the answer you want. It's in holding on to hope and holding space for something bigger than yourself. As Elisha's journey continues, we'll see his faith tested in even bigger arenas, on the battlefields of kings, in the halls of power, and among the people who need him most. But for now, remember this: every act of faith, every moment of respect, every refusal to give in to cynicism, these are their own kinds of miracles. Now, let's see what happens when Elisha steps onto the national stage and the fate of an entire people hangs in the balance. Let's shift our focus for a moment. Up until now, we've seen Elisha, the miracle worker, the healer, the man who cared for widows and villages. But there's another side to Elisha's story, one that shows just how far the reach of true leadership can go. Elisha wasn't just a prophet for individuals. He was a national leader, a voice in the courts of kings, a counselor when his people stood on the brink of war. Imagine this: ancient Israel surrounded by powerful enemies. The Syrians in particular were always plotting. Time and again, they tried to invade, using spies, ambushes, and military tricks. But every time, Israel seemed to be one step ahead. How? Because Elisha was listening. He would receive visions from God, revealing the enemy's secrets. He'd warn the king, "Don't camp near that valley. The Syrians are waiting." He'd say, "Move your army. Change your route. You're walking into a trap." Again and again, Elisha's wisdom saved lives, maybe even the nation itself. It got to the point where the Syrian king was convinced he had a traitor in his own camp. But his advisors said, "It's not a spy, my king. It's Elisha, the prophet in Israel. He tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom." Let that sink in. Elisha's spiritual insight shaped the course of wars and diplomacy, but the Syrians didn't take it lightly. One night, they sent an army to surround the city where Elisha was staying. The city woke up to see soldiers, horses, and chariots everywhere. Elisha's servant was terrified. He said, "What do we do now?" Elisha prayed, "Lord, open his eyes so he may see." Suddenly, the servant saw a mountain full of horses and chariots of fire, God's own army, invisible until that moment. Elisha prayed again, and the enemy soldiers were struck with blindness. He led them straight to the king of Israel, but instead of ordering their execution, Elisha told the king to feed them and send them home. The result? A rare moment of peace, at least for a while. That's leadership, not just defeating enemies, but transforming threats into opportunities for mercy, understanding, and unexpected alliances. Let's bring this forward to today. Think about world leaders who faced crises on a national scale, presidents who navigated through wars, advisors who diffused potential disasters. Take Abraham Lincoln. He held a fractured nation together during its darkest hour, using both wisdom and empathy. Or think of the quiet power of diplomacy, how skilled negotiators have prevented wars not with force, but with understanding and courage. It's not so different from Elisha's role. He stood at the crossroads of faith and politics, offering guidance not just from strategy, but from a place of deeper vision. He saw beyond the immediate crisis to the bigger picture, and in doing so, he protected his people, not just from swords, but from the slow poison of fear and revenge. Here's the lesson I take from Elisha's time as a national leader. Spiritual leadership and civic leadership aren't separate. A wise leader sees both the heart of the people and the needs of the nation. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword or a decree, but a prayer. A voice willing to speak hard truths, to stand in the gap, to seek peace even when conflict seems inevitable. And just like Elisha, real leaders aren't always in the spotlight. Sometimes they're the quiet counselors, the advisors, the ones who see what others miss. They carry the burden of their people. They look for ways to heal, not just win. Maybe you know someone like that. A mentor, a teacher, a coach who brought people together, who guided a group through hard times, who saw beyond the problem to the possibility. Maybe you're being called to be that kind of leader yourself. As Elisha's story moves forward, we'll see even more moments where faith and leadership collide, where the fate of a nation rests on wisdom, vision, and a willingness to act with compassion. But there's something even deeper coming, because sometimes the greatest battle isn't on a field. It's inside a human heart. Let's see what happens when pride, humility, and healing all come together in a way that will change lives forever. Let's talk about pride. It's easy to spot in other people, and a lot harder to recognize in ourselves. But pride can be the one thing standing between us and the miracle we most need. No story captures this truth quite like the story of Naaman. Naaman was a big deal. He was a powerful commander in the Syrian army, a man respected by kings and feared by his enemies. He was used to giving orders and having them followed, without question. But even great men have weak spots. Naaman had leprosy, a disease that no amount of money, power, or military skill could cure. He tried everything he could, but nothing worked. One day, hope came from the most unexpected place. A servant girl captured from Israel told Naaman's wife, "If only my master could see the prophet in Samaria, he would be healed." Imagine that, a general listening to a slave. But Naaman was desperate, so he packed his bags with silver and gold, loaded up gifts, and set off for Israel with a letter from his king. He expected special treatment, maybe a grand ceremony. Instead, he got Elisha's servant at the door. No fanfare, no red carpet, just a message. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and you'll be healed. That's it. No magic words, no dramatic gestures, just a simple command. Naaman was furious. The Jordan? That muddy river. Aren't the rivers back home cleaner and better? Why did I travel all this way for this? His pride almost cost him everything. He was ready to turn around and go home. But then, something powerful happened. His own servants, people he might never have listened to before, spoke up. They said, "If the prophet had asked you to do something hard, wouldn't you have done it? Why not do something so simple?" Naaman paused. He swallowed his pride. He walked down to the river. He dipped himself in the water, once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. By the 7th time, he came out clean. His skin was restored, like a child's. He was healed. But more than that, he was changed. He went back to Elisha, full of gratitude, his heart different from when he'd first arrived. The miracle wasn't just in his skin, it was in his spirit. Naaman discovered the power of humility. He learned that sometimes the greatest change comes when we let go of our own expectations, our own need to be in control. It's a lesson that echoes through the ages. Think about the world of sports. How many star athletes at the peak of their fame have been humbled by injury, by loss, by mistakes? Think of Tiger Woods, once unstoppable, then brought low by scandal and setbacks. But it was only through humility, through rebuilding from the ground up, that he found his way back, not just as a golfer, but as a person. Or look at celebrities who use their influence to apologize, to learn, to grow, showing the world that real greatness isn't about never falling, but about rising stronger and wiser after you do. The same lesson shows up in boardrooms, classrooms, even in our own families. We all have moments when pride stands in the way. Maybe it's refusing to ask for help. Maybe it's holding on to being right, even when we're wrong. Maybe it's judging someone else, only to realize later we were the ones missing the point. Here's the truth. Humility opens doors. It brings healing, not just to our bodies, but to our relationships, our dreams, and our souls. Pride says, I can do it myself. Humility says, I'm willing to try another way. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to change. And that, more than any miracle, is what makes life richer, deeper, and more meaningful. So next time you face a challenge, big or small, ask yourself, what would happen if I let go of my pride? What miracle might be waiting just on the other side of a simple, humble step? As Elisha's story continues, we'll see that true change, true healing, and true leadership always start in the heart. But sometimes even those closest to the miracle worker can stumble. Let's see what happens when greed rather than humility takes center stage, and the consequences that follow. Let's talk about temptation, not the kind that shouts from billboards or flashes across your phone. I'm talking about the quiet kind, the little voice that whispers, just this once, no one will ever know. Gehazi knew that voice all too well. He was Elisha's servant, someone who had witnessed more miracles than most people could dream of. He'd seen lives changed, hunger fed, even the dead brought back to life. You'd think that would be enough. But sometimes, even those closest to greatness can be pulled off course. It all started after the healing of Naaman. Remember Naaman, the powerful Syrian commander, healed from leprosy by simply dipping himself in the Jordan River. He was overwhelmed with gratitude. He offered Elisha gifts, silver, gold, fine clothes, but Elisha refused them all. He wanted Naaman to know that God's grace couldn't be bought or sold. But Gehazi saw the treasures slipping away. He thought, why should all of that go back to Syria? I could use a little for myself. So Gehazi ran after Naaman. He made up a story, said that some visitors had come and that Elisha had changed his mind about the gifts. Naaman, still grateful, handed over silver and new clothes without a second thought. Gehazi hid them away, thinking he'd gotten away clean. But you can't hide from the truth. Elisha confronted him. Where have you been, Gehazi? Gehazi lied again. But Elisha saw right through it. And then came the consequence, harsh and unforgettable. The leprosy that had left Naaman now clung to Gehazi. It was a moment that shocked everyone. It's tempting to see Gehazi as the villain, but if we're honest, he's a lot like us. He saw an opportunity. He wanted just a little more. Maybe it felt harmless, a reward for hard work. But that's how temptation works. It blurs the lines, making right and wrong seem negotiable. We all face moments like Gehazi did. Maybe it's fudging a number on a report. Maybe it's telling a little white lie to avoid trouble. Maybe it's justifying a shortcut because everyone else does it. But the problem with compromising our integrity, even in small ways, is that the consequences often reach further than we expect. A reputation is built on trust, and trust, once broken, is hard to win back. Think about the scandals we see in the news. Athletes caught cheating, business leaders exposed for fraud, celebrities who fall from grace because they chased fame or fortune at the expense of honesty. In every case, the story is the same. A small decision made in the shadows spirals into a lesson learned the hard way. Integrity isn't always glamorous. It's not about making the perfect choice when everyone's watching. It's about doing what's right, especially when no one is. That's what separates lasting greatness from fleeting success. Here's a real-world example. In 2009, an American runner named Meb Keflezighi won the New York City Marathon. He trained hard, fought through pain, and won the race fair and square. But just a year later, another runner, caught using performance-enhancing drugs, had his victory stripped away. Meb's name remains respected, his achievement untarnished. But the other runner's legacy? A footnote in a cautionary tale. That's the power of integrity. It's a lesson for all of us. Short-term gain bought at the expense of our values leads to long-term loss. Sometimes the cost isn't money or fame or opportunity. It's the peace of knowing you did the right thing. So here's the takeaway. Guard your integrity, even when it feels like no one is looking. If you're ever tempted to bend the truth or chase after what isn't yours, remember Gehazi. Remember that every action has a ripple effect. Sometimes the consequences are immediate. Sometimes they show up years later, but they always show up. Let Gehazi's story remind us, The true reward isn't in what we grab, but in what we become when we choose honesty, even when it's hard. Now, as our journey with Elisha draws to a close, let's turn to a final miracle, a moment so powerful it happened after he was gone. A miracle that reminds us that legacies, like values, can live on long after we leave this world. Let's discover what happens when faith, hope, and memory all come together. One last time. Let's end our journey with a story that goes beyond the limits of life and death. A story that asks, how far can the power of one life reach? Can a person's influence echo long after they're gone? With Elisha, the answer is a miraculous yes. Picture a dusty field years after Elisha's passing. The prophet who had once changed the world was gone, his body buried, his voice silent. But the story wasn't over. One day, a group of men was carrying a friend's body to be buried. Suddenly, a band of raiders appeared on the horizon. In panic, the mourners hurriedly lowered the body into the nearest tomb, Elisha's tomb. As the lifeless man touched Elisha's bones, something unimaginable happened. He came back to life. He stood up and walked out of that tomb. Can you imagine the shock, the awe, the hope that must have rippled through those men? It was a miracle for the ages. But what does it mean for us? Elisha's bones didn't just bring a man back to life. They showed that the impact of a faithful life doesn't end with our last breath. Our legacy, the good we do, the faith we share, the love we give, can touch lives we may never meet. It can inspire hope in moments of fear, light in times of darkness, and courage where there was once only despair. Let's pause and think. Who in your life has made you better, even after they were gone? Maybe it's a grandparent whose wisdom guides you, a teacher whose encouragement still rings in your mind, a friend whose kindness changed your path. That's legacy. That's the power of living with intention, with love, with faith that reaches beyond today. And it's not just in ancient stories. Think about Rosa Parks. Her simple act of courage on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, refusing to give up her seat, sparked a movement that changed a nation. Rosa is gone, but her legacy breathes in every act of justice and equality. Or think about someone like Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, who taught generations of children the power of kindness, acceptance, and love. He's no longer with us, but his spirit lives on every time someone chooses compassion over cruelty. Elisha's final miracle is a reminder we don't have to be prophets to leave something behind. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every stand for what's right, these are seeds planted for tomorrow. We may not see the harvest, but the seeds are real. There's a saying, you plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. That's legacy. Maybe, just maybe, the real miracle isn't the supernatural. It's the way one life can ignite another, the way hope can be passed down from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation. So here's my question for you. What kind of legacy are you building day by day? Are you living in a way that brings life, light, and hope to others, even in small ways? Because that's where true miracles begin, not in the headlines, but in the quiet choices we make, not in the big moments, but in the steady practice of love and faith. Maybe you'll never see the full impact of your actions, but don't let that stop you. Live with the kind of courage, compassion, and belief that can outlive your time on earth. Elisha's bones brought one man back to life, but his real legacy is the countless lives changed by his faith, his service, his hope. You have that same power, right here, right now. Let your life be the miracle someone else needs. And as we close this journey, remember, you don't need to be famous or perfect or even understood. You just need to live each day with purpose and love. That's the kind of legacy that never dies. Thank you for being part of this story. And now, go write your own. Let's take a breath and look back at the journey we just shared. We've traveled from dusty fields to royal courts, from moments of doubt to miracles of hope. We witnessed the power of faith, the courage to change, and the legacy that one life can leave long after it's gone. We saw how compassion, humility, and integrity are worth more than any treasure, and how every small act, every word of encouragement can ripple far beyond what we see. Maybe the real miracle isn't just in the stories of the past. Maybe it's in the choices you make today. So here's what I want you to remember. You have the power to bring light to someone's life. You can be the reason someone finds hope again. Legacy isn't about being famous. It's about showing up, loving fiercely, and living true to your values, even when it's hard. What's one small act of kindness you can do today? Who needs your encouragement? Who needs to hear that their story matters? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections in the comments. If this story moved you, pass it along to someone who could use a little hope. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss the stories that remind us what really matters. Thank you for spending your time with me. Thank you for believing that miracles can still happen. Your story isn't over yet. Go out there and write the next amazing chapter. I'll see you in the next adventure.